Today, episode either 25 or 26, depending on how you count, mastering uncertainty as a founder.
Risk management?
Yeah. Steinbrenner wants everyone in the front office to give a lecture in their area of business expertise.
Well, what makes them think you're a risk management expert?
I guess it's on my resume.
Anthony, do you have risk management on your resume?
I will now.
Have you ever heard of Ingvar Kamprad? I mean, you know little Ingvar. You guys used to hang out? No? All right. In 1943, at 17 years old, he started selling a little company called IKEA. He sold matchboxes and pens. But his big risk was starting to take furniture, packing it down, and selling it in flat boxes. Now, what happened? He ended up revolutionizing the world of furniture and created an empire from this tiny little village in Sweden. I don't know if it's tiny. I haven't been there. I've been to IKEA, though. I wonder if the villages are bigger than IKEA. Or if IKEA is bigger than the villages. I don't know. Anyway.
I think you're right. I think IKEA is bigger than villages. You put two IKEAs together, and that's the village.
That's the village where he founded this thing. So, Anthony, conventional wisdom around risk is that entrepreneurs, founders, we're wild risk takers. We're people that are cowboys. We're wildcatters. What do you think? Is that true?
I think in relative terms, it's absolutely true. I think that, you know, we've talked about this a lot, Chris, where founders are typically risk adverse, but in relative terms take more risks than their maybe the peers that they used to work with at the big corporate job. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I was just about to be like, no, they're not. But it's kind of true in the sense that what I think that when people think about becoming an entrepreneur, they think about these big risks. I'm going to go all in. I'm going to do this. And that's kind of not true. But just the act of becoming a founder is something that is incredibly risky. And so even just saying that you're going to be a founder probably means that you're you have less or more risk tolerance than the average human.
Yeah, you have to, right? You look at the stories about people like Elon Musk putting everything, like he spent so much money starting and investing in SpaceX and Tesla. He had to go sleep on his friends' couches because he couldn't afford his own place to stay. Now, I don't know if that's entirely true, but I was going to say,
is that actually true? I don't really know either.
So it is true. It is true that during a few months, he went and stayed on like Larry Page's couch and other folks' couch because he just didn't have a place to stay. And the legend is, the lore is that it was because he like put everything in. But I don't think that's generally speaking the right way to think about it. The conventional wisdom actually says that taking big risks is the only way to achieve big rewards. Do you think that's the case? Like, is it big risk, big reward, or is it not?
I think I think that this concept of risk is a little bit. It's almost like a head fake. It's almost like a magic trick where people think that the risk and reward thing is where the value of companies come from. You've got to take a huge risk to get a huge reward. When the reality is that most of us as founders, we're trying to, we know just inherently how risky this thing is, right? We know that 80% of companies fail, but we also try to drive out the smaller risks in a day-to-day basis. We try to make sure that, we're not doing stupid, huge, risky things by betting our entire company's future on one product, enhancement or one marketing campaign that's going to, really this is going to be the thing that really makes a difference in our business. I think for the most part, we try to de-risk those environments. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, de-risking. There's this thing called risk management. However you want to define it, right? If you want
It's
to put
on
it
your resume.
it's
Well,
on my
exactly.
resume.
You're an expert because it's on your resume. So
KPMG says the companies with strong risk management practices are 25% more likely to achieve their business objectives. But that's KPMG who's responsible for helping, right? Like that's kind of asking your barber if you need a haircut. It's
right.
not you, me. Like that would be me.
Wow, you already making bold jokes. We're only 5 minutes in. Already just.
But I thought a lot about this this morning in preparing for the podcast and thinking. So Nate, I didn't look this up, and I'm sure there's examples, but I couldn't think of any big company that failed because they took a risk they shouldn't have. The big companies that I know that have failed are the ones that didn't take the risks they should have. Can you think of one, Chris?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, the famous story that pops into my head is Nokia. Nokia was a tire manufacturer company. We're talking a lot about Scandinavian companies this morning. But the Nokia...
Scandinavians are known for their risk taking.
They are pretty risky. But, they were a tire company and ended up being a mobile phone manufacturing company. They ended up, and I think that they do a lot of other lines of business, but they were classically diversifying their risk by looking at other lines of business. I think it's an interesting one. I can't think of almost every story of failure. Except for Enron. They were taking compliance risks. they were taking legal
really
risks.
Good. Yeah. So they took financial risks, like literal,
that's right.
Let's risk going to jail kind of risk. Like
exactly. Yeah. When the CEO should end up in jail, I'm going to say that's pretty risky. Well done, Enron. You're out there really taking risks.
That's a great. So you came up with one. I didn't think of that.
There you go. Yeah. Just popped in.
But you think of Kodak, right? Kodak didn't want to risk the market going away from film. It was writing on the wall. They literally they were so risk adverse. They literally created a digital camera that required film.
I think the funny part about this is that as we talk about risk as it pertains to bigger companies, is you're literally talking about why startups exist.
Exactly right.
If big companies were great at taking risks, we're able to be like, okay, we're going to move away from our core business, even though that we know we have to meet next quarters and the quarter afters, guidance from Wall Street. If they were good at it, startups would have a way harder time being successful. But the fact that they are so bad at pivoting and figuring out what's going on in the market is the reason why, companies can start and grow, and small companies have opportunities because they can be so much faster in the marketplace. Agree with that?
Big companies are set up in a way where the people doing the real work are incented to follow the process, and they hire people that are process oriented. Give me a system. I mean, how many times, Chris, have you hired somebody out of a corporate environment and they come in and they're like, all right, where's my support system? And it's like, there is none. And that is like, you're operating without a safety net, right? Which is essentially if you miss the bar in your flip going from one bar to another, you're going to land on the ground. Like it's a hard landing. So it is kind of the way, and it's a natural progression from early stage startup where everybody's kind of incented to take risks and try new things. Most importantly, look foolish, right? So part of the risk isn't just the financial risk of trying something new, but it's also looking silly or saying the wrong thing or being like, you got that totally wrong, and being okay with failure. Small failure with the small f, that's failure with the big F. So it's not just risk with the business, but it's risk with your reputation that I think is probably the harder risk for founders to take. And that is antithetical to the corporate culture. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's kind of funny because as we were preparing for this episode, I was like, I think that founders are way more risk averse than people think. But as you start to describe that concept, I think that the little failures are the things that we try to de-risk. But you live with this constant threat.
Existential threat.
Yeah, existential threat. And you get up in the morning, I'm not going to get all philosophical on you, but like it's like, living in Berlin during World War II, or it's like living in England during World War II. Like
it's not like that at all.
You wake up in the morning with a threat. Like it is, and that guides a lot of your decisions. It guides a lot of your behaviors throughout the day. So it's like it's an interesting like pivot to be like, okay, yeah, you're right. But I think the reaction that we have as founders is living under this existential threat on a day in, day out basis is that we do try to de-risk the smaller decisions. We try to drive out risk as much as humanly possible from the smaller incremental growth. Is that true or no?
Yeah. So I think the analogy you're trying to draw is imagine if you woke up every day not knowing how you're going to feed your family next week. Like the pantry is almost bare. That's most founders' startup life. And if it's not next week, it's not next month or 6 months from now. And so you are, risk is kind of built like you have to take risks to go and feed your family. You have to take risks to keep your company up and running. So it's kind of a built-in thing in a startup. You start a startup and all of a sudden you are clamoring for survival. So you have introduced risk into your life. Maybe, knowingly, right? I mean, everybody that does this knows it. So
yeah, but it's funny.
But it is interesting because the risk profile changes as your company grows. So talk a little bit about how risk changes and how founders need to tackle risk depending on the stage of their startup.
It's a really good point. And you know how there's a phenomenon called nose blindness, which is when you get into a room and you smell something, like eventually you're going to stop smelling that. I wonder if I've become fear blind. Like I was just, or wrist blind. I'm just like, oh yeah, I guess it's just normal. Like it's just kind of the normal thing. But it's a really good question as far as what risks are you willing to take at different stages of the company. And I think also what risks are you willing to take different stages of your entrepreneurial journey? You and I are in very different places than the first company I started was relatively low risk, right? I was fine. I had a savings account. If I failed, I felt like I could go get another job. Now, as I'm, way older, okay, pretty old. Though my financial responsibilities have come up as well. But as far as I think for early stage companies, one of the risks is not taking enough risks. I know it sounds crazy, but the idea is that for a brand new company that's really just coming off the ground, if you're sticking with your thought process and you're just like, no, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do, and not paying attention to what feedback you're getting from the market, your customers, investors, et cetera, then you're probably taking on a larger risk than you even want to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, in early stage companies, you're trying to identify those existential risks and mitigating them. But at some point, it's like they just exist. Like there's nothing that you can really do about it. And so you kind of have to just live in this, like, if that happens, I'm dead. And there's literally nothing I can do about it. So then you go down to like taking risks on product market fit and channel and customer communication. So you take a look at like Liquid Death, for example. They took some really big risks on their go-to-market, bloody, gory, cartoon, alienating messaging that really paid off for them. Personally, I didn't like it, but I do drink Liquid Death now every once in a while. It's too expensive for me most of the time, but
it's French water.
it's water like for $6 a can or something, like it's like ridiculous. But I mean, you can't argue the risks that they took in their messaging. And so I think that's one of the things that you can look at. Not that you should take the Liquid Death model, but they probably took a lot of risks along the way to figure out what messaging is going to get them the most bang for their buck and still be on brand. And it's also, you're taking risks with your brand. Like, is it like, are you trying to go premium and all of a sudden you realize you have a much better niche in value-based pricing rather than premium-based pricing? Like, you have to take experiments, i.e. take risks on every aspect of your business on early stage. But now, Chris, you've found your product market fit, you kind of figured out your customer messaging, you're starting to establish your brand. Those risks, now you're risking when you change your messaging or do something off brand, you're risking your brand. So at what stage do you start to play it careful or more careful?
It's usually when we get fired, right? Like, it's usually when they bring in professional operators, and it's like, because we're like, hey, we're going to pivot this whole thing. And the board's like, yeah, are you? I'm not really sure. Yeah. I will say that one of the things I always think is funny, Anthony, is when you have an early stage founder that spends a long time talking about competitors. And you're like, I'm glad that you have a good idea of a competitive landscape, but you have no fucking idea what they're going to do. You just go out and try to figure out some cool product market fit and then innovate from there. But like,
how does that relate to risk? So I'm trying to connect that dot.
No, it's like, so if you think, like, if it's competitive risk, like you think about the normal,
The competitive
old
risk.
business
Got
way,
it.
like competitive risks, risks associated with legislation, things like that. Those are all things that you can't control as a founder. And so if you spend a long time talking to me or another advisor, investor, or something about, hey, well, we think this is going to happen in the political environment. Like, dude, you don't know what's going to happen in the political environment. Just go out and try to build something. And to your point, is if it happens, you're dead, and that's okay. Like, go on and do the next thing. All right.
It's kind of like this metaphor of, when looking for risk, do you look behind your shoulder, aka competitors, or are you looking forward at what you think is going to be happening 6, 12, 5 years from now, right? 6, 12 months, 5 years from now. And it's much more productive to be looking forward. Where are my customers going to be, and how are we not meeting those needs now? Versus, what are my competitors doing, and how can I feature level them up 1 or 2 features?
Yeah. So we've been all over the place so far, but so let's recap what we've got. So we know that, even though that I think I've probably become a little bit of risk blind to this point, we know that we wake up in the morning, that founders do just associate, like, just live with more kind of a risk environment. But we've also agreed that there are kind of risks that you should be paying attention to. And there's risks that, as an early stage startup, you can't really worry about. And then I think that the final point that we've been making is that you, as an early stage founder, you have to take risks. Otherwise, you're actually not creating the innovation or the space to be able to go and do that. And not only do you have to do that, every member of your team has to do that, and you have to create a culture of risk taking. Is that a good summation of where we are so far?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, a culture of risk taking to a point.
Okay, so let's ask some wild contrarian points of view for a second. So what if it was not careful business planning? What if it is crazy risk taking that actually creates value? And famously, early Google, one engineer came in and coded the early AdWords product overnight, I think, or like over a weekend or something like that. It was one person. Nobody asked him to do it. He just came in and took that risk. And that's what created the value in the company. It's a little bit of a contrarian point, but is that something resonates with you or no?
It's so, I mean, Google had, it comes down to resources, right? So Google had resources to allow people to take risks. And if you're a bootstrap company, you may not have, like, if you take one of those risks where you put an employee on something for a week, it could disrupt your payroll next month. So it really comes down to, should you R&D, right? Research and development. How much of your budget should you be allocating to essentially risk taking, trying to figure out new ways of doing different things or opening up new channels. But if you're not taking risks, then you're just like everybody else.
So here's the interesting question, is because and I preach this all the time. I'm like, hey, your idea doesn't mean shit. It's about how you execute on that idea. Can you go out and actually build a plan and execute and build a product that goes and proves that you can take advantage of this opportunity that you believe exists? But what we're kind of saying here is that if we're building a risk-taking culture, part of this is what we have to do is to create a strategic plan and go forward on that strategic plan. And we have to work in sprints, or we work to execute that plan, relentlessly execute that plan. But if I'm building a risk-taking culture and one of my employees is like, fuck it, I'm not going to go work on that plan. I'm going to go do this entirely other thing because I think it's going to be more valuable long-term. How do we hold both of those things in a startup culture?
We're talking to startup founders, but we're also talking about founders that have been doing this for 10 or 20 years, right? In the same business. So I would encourage startups is all about risk taking. It's you kind of have this you're not going to break anything because there's nothing to break yet mentality, which is really healthy, which you lose that ability as your startup grows and starts to you literally every time box yourself into that innovator's dilemma, where if you can innovate yourself out of a market. So you just have to, early stage companies just have to take more risks in order to figure out where they're going. And I think you brought up that Google example, which is a great one, where you, in order to properly take risk as you grow and get into more established, 50 employees, 100 employees, 1,000 employees, you need to carve out some of your budget for everybody to take risks. I've seen this. This is another great example, Chris, where you have these really large companies that are saying that feel this stagnation creeping in, right? And one of the things they try to do is they're like, all right, we're going to create a skunk works. Have you heard the term skunk works? It's
yeah, this is great. And it's also,
we're going to start a startup within our big company.
Yeah.
I've never seen a skunk works succeed, ever.
It does not work.
It doesn't work because now you have this department that gets to do all the fun shit.
Right.
And they're trying to take resources, and everybody's like, I'm not going to help them do their fun stuff. But what Google did that I think was really interesting is they said, everybody, you work 4 days a week on the thing that your job is, and you get to work 1 day a week on whatever fancies you. And I think it's a really interesting model. It's like everybody is taking risks. Everybody's trying to start something. I don't know if they still do it, but I think that's a really smart model.
So I think it's the point that I think we're coming to here is, as founders, it's not about being too much of a cowboy and just taking risks all day, every day. It's not about taking, no risks. It's about somehow managing our risks. It's about understanding the risks that are associated and then managing those, which is not avoiding risk, but understanding the risk and taking smart bets along the way. Is that resonate? Is Is that a fair summation of kind of?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. It's the first the first rule of risk management is to understand what your risks are. And if you're not, it comes back to that question that I get all the time, what keeps you up at night? It's the fact that if I'm sleeping well, I'm missing something.
Yeah. This is a lot.
So if I sleep well, I stay up at night because I'm missing something. If I know what's going on and I know what's risky, I probably sleep pretty well.
I think for me at least, in this stage of my founder journey, I have two buckets, and there are risks that I know that just exist, and that if I sit around and worry about the macro economy, what competitors are doing, the interest rate environment, I mean, all these things I have zero control over. And so then I create a second bucket, which is, but I can't control my messaging. I can't control my product. I can't control my discovery, and start to try to figure out what risks are manageable and what are not manageable. I think that's the thing, at least, that helps me sleep at night, because there's other shit that, like, oh, well, there might be, there might be a pandemic. Like, well, shit, you can't plan for a pandemic unless you're Anthony Fauci, which he can. That's literally
He
literally his job.
did.
Yeah, it's literally his
he
job.
literally
Yeah.
planned a pandemic. Let's put it.
Okay.
No politics. I'm sorry, I said no politics, but that was a political joke. So just get over it.
So let's talk about lessons, Anthony. Guide us through this one.
All right. So how do founders put this in practice? First, have you ever conducted a SWOT assessment? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats?
I did. So, I'm a business school dropout. Like, I went to business school and then dropped out to start my first company. In business school, they had us look at SWOTs. But other than that, like, the other idea is, like, writing a full business plan is such a joke to startup people, to founders. But that's like, oh, we got to write a business plan. That's kind of business schooly stuff. So yes, I have, but not in the last 20 years.
Yeah. And it does not have to be this really formal, like 4-hour meeting, but I think but for yourself and even for a small team, small leadership team, I think doing those regular SWOT assessments can be a powerful tool just to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page about what your threats are, what your risk vectors are. So doing a SWOT analysis, just look it up there. It's a really easy tool. It's basically 4 squares, SWOT, and you just write your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's just a good exercise to do kind of on a regular basis, especially if you're in a highly risky environment or a highly competitive environment. Another thing that you could do right out the gate, as much as you can, and I've failed here miserably, is you need to diversify your revenue stream. So your number one risk is money running out, right? What's the stat? 50% of start. What is the stat? I have it written down here.
70 or something.
70% of tech companies fail because they run out of money. So running out of money is your biggest risk. So diversify how much money is coming in and where it's coming in from.
Sources,
really important. As quickly as you possibly can. Have a contingency fund. So make sure you have money set aside for a rainy day. Hard to do, but important to do. Do what you and I do, Chris, like seek advice from other founders, other mentors, coaches. Get involved in a founder peer group so you can bounce. The biggest risk that you have probably is the risks that you don't know about, the blind spots, and getting around other folks that have been there, done that, even if they're not in your industry, super important. That was a shameless self-promotion for the Pro Founder Network. So profoundernetwork.com, click on founder boards under grow. One of the things I've written down here is implement risk management policies. Like,
anytime you say the word policy, we're just like, ooh.
It's like I told you about the only policy I had in my first startup was there's the no wedgie policy. So I'm anti-policy. But some kind of risk, I don't even know what, Chris, help me with this. What does a risk management policy look like? Like define one.
So I actually think I'm going to flip this on its head just a little bit, which is
Great.
you do need to have a management policy, and it needs to be your risk management policy, which is you as a founder, you need to sit down, even in the moments where you believe you're going to be a billionaire, and you need to have a conversation. If it's just you and your dog, have a conversation with your dog about what you're doing and what gates you're willing to go through for your personal risk. Because the piece we've been talking about here is company risks, and I think that there is an underlying factor here, which is we have seen founders mortgage houses, get divorces, blow through 401ks and savings, any sort of safety net that they had, because they believed so much in this thing that they put their lives at risk, their well-being and happiness at risk to try to make this thing exist in the world. And so I recommend writing it down and giving it to a friend, coach, trusted advisor, whatever, and say, hey, within 90 days, if I'm not doing this, I'm going to put a little question mark by that. Within 180 days, if I were not doing this, I'm going to put a question mark by that. And then your risk can adjust, but write that shit down, because you will try to fool yourself. You will try to talk yourself, oh, I said that if it wasn't profitable after a year, I would quit, but I'm seeing so much traction. And meanwhile, your friends being like,
traction.
Yeah. Your friends are like, dude, you've just cashed in your last, savings bond that your great grandma gave you, man.
We're almost there.
Yeah, we're almost there.
We're almost there. I've said that. You know how many times I've said that to myself? I'm almost there. We're
Brother,
close.
Right. We're so close. Right. But we fool ourselves in that. And so the policy that I would recommend is not necessarily a company policy. It is a human policy. It is you as a founder, make sure you are making the right decision for you and your family. I know you love it. And now you want this thing to exist in the world, but don't do stupid shit.
Yeah. And I think, getting back to, you mentioned something about divorce, and in reality, you need to start asking some what if questions. What if my co-founder gets a divorce? What does that mean for his ownership? And am I going to have to be doing, am I going to have to take his ex-wife on as a partner? And so you can mitigate that by your operating agreement, and just make sure that is planned for in your operating agreement. But you need to ask those hard, what if my co-founder dies? What if, what can be another external threat? What if my lease runs out? What do I do? What if my landlord, you need to be thinking about all the things that can go. Like, the first step in risk management is, like I said, understanding your risks. Write down a list, write down all the bad things that can happen, which is it's the same thing as crafting your will. It's the last thing you want to be doing, right? But write down all the things that can go wrong. What if I die? And then put a little plan into place, like how you're going to do it. Now, you're not going to be able to put a plan into place for all of them, but try to knock some of those off by mitigating those risks. Another thing that you can do, switching gears a little bit, is if you're not measuring your business with some kind of key performance indicators, KPIs, then you don't know when something is going wrong. If you're not measuring your customer acquisition cost, CAC, you're at risk of that CAC going up and you not recognizing it until it's too late. So putting some KPIs in place, the key drivers of your business, and measuring those daily, weekly, monthly, whatever makes sense for your business, is another way to mitigate your risk and inform your decision making as you're going forward. And the last little note that I have here is there's some key aspects of your business that you can actually insure to protect against losses. And if you have the capital, just hire a general business counsel person to say, what are the risks of my existential risks of my business that I should be thinking?
I like this handsome stranger here online that says
Who is that?
it says,
Sheila Weiler.
yeah, I don't know. It's a strange thing. Uh,
Schley, and
I think
Sickle.
he's now our third host, actually, is Scooty. Is yeah, from entrepreneurial finance class in college is don't start a business with debt. Yeah, that's probably a pretty good one. I think that one of the big lessons through the history of entrepreneurship is that debt takes down companies, leverage takes down companies. Like it is a big pressure when you start to get on, massive amounts of debt. Okay, so I think we've been kind of all over the place, but I'm going to start with the company, and then we'll talk about the individual, and then we'll talk about what the lessons that we've learned so far. So the company, as a startup, the risk is constant, and it's the reason why you exist. It is something you have to live with. You have to start to identify what risks you're trying to deal with and what risks are just completely out of your control. It is something that you need to try to create a culture within your company of taking risks and going after opportunities, et cetera. For individuals, we need to make sure as founders that we identify where we are in our journey, and make sure that we have our own personal risk profiles associated with what we're willing to do and how much risk we're willing to take. And I think a lot of what we were just talking about with insurance and using KPIs is, I think to a certain degree, you can classify a startup as an organization that systematically just goes through risk after risk after risk and tries to de-risk these things as you're moving forward as a business. And it starts off with a product risk, then it's customer risk, all those things. You just systematically work through that. And so it is, I think, one of those deals that we just have to live with. So it's inevitable. It can lead to growth if you're doing it right. It can be a positive thing for you. Yeah. We as founders need to make sure we're very, very clear about how we associate with it, and really try to de-risk your startup through every stage of the journey. So deep dive recommendations. The one that has been popping into my head for this entire thing is The Lean Startup. It is the classic startup book of our generation, and it talks about failure. It really is probably the best conversation around this. Anti-Fragile, probably my favorite book of all time. Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, good one. Great by Choice, Jim Collins and Morton Hansen. And Thinking Fast and Slow. I said the Anti-Fragile is my favorite book, but Thinking Fast and Slow is the most important business book ever written.
I do one of those two. One of those three. One of those three. I'm either fast or I'm slow, but I can't do all three at the same time.
Yeah, I think slow and talk fast. Is that, yeah. That's probably too. So, Anthony, what is up for next week? Or today's Thursday. Yeah, next week.
Next week. So, next time we're going to talk about something really interesting, something that I realized was missing in our topic list, and that's the art of saying no. So, as entrepreneurs, we tend to always we have this opportunity radar and want to say yes to everything, and we're going to talk about how that can be damaging to your business, and how do you say no without, in a graceful and kind way. I also will say, remember to follow us on linkedin.com /company/howtofounder. And then if you simply go to howtofounder.com, you can follow us and subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Apple Podcast channel, Spotify channel, and iHeartRadio, or just subscribe to our RSS feed. So howtofounder.com is where you want to subscribe to us. Please follow us on one of those. We're trying real hard to build an audience here, and the more subscribers we can get right away, the better. Chris, another great conversation with you. I'm starting to really kind of, dare I say it, I like having these conversations with you. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and just model this. And no, Anthony, I will not drive up to your house and bring you a breakfast burrito this morning. No, got to draw my line. I've got boundaries.
I don't remember asking that question.
Oh, all good. Yeah, Anthony, great episode. I appreciate the conversation. And as per usual, I came into it being like, oh, we're not really risky people. And it's like, oh yeah, my opinion's
Yeah.
changed throughout the conversation.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching.